Good afternoon and welcome to our regular politics chat at jsonline.com. Full disclosure, I'm not Bill Glauber. I just got to play him on the internet today. I'm Greg Borowski, projects editor at the Journal Sentinel, and with me today is our regular Dan Bice and our guest Christian Schneider. We're going to spend the next 30 minutes or so talking about politics and what's hot in the news this week, as well as taking a lot of questions that readers have submitted. So we'll get into it in just a moment, but first, I've been told to make clear here the roles of columnists. Dan and Christian are both columnists, but they're not exactly alike. Dan is a columnist on the news side, so his columns are based on reporting that he does and are very well reported and thought out. Christian is a Schneider on the columnist on the editorial side, and his is much more opinion driven. So you'll notice that there's no correlation for where they're sitting, left, right. Otherwise, this is not crossfire, but we'll just jump right into it. So let me go with our first thought. Right to work is in the news today, so let's switch it up a little bit. We all know where right to work is going. It's going to be signed by the governor and put into place in very short order. Tell us, Dan, first, what do you think is the biggest thing that we're not hearing about while everybody is focused on right to work?
I think this is one of the few times where we're seeing all of the Republicans working together. We're not seeing very many issues where that's happening as well. And we just heard recently where Robin Vos said that he thinks the state's going to be putting too much money into the Bucs Stadium. And I think there's growing frustration among Republican leaders with Walker's absence, the fact that he's not around to guide all of his programs through. I think that's the big issue that's going on behind the scenes right now.
And what do you think, Christian?
Everybody's saying that Scott Walker thinks right to work is a distraction. Well,
he's changed his mind.
Yeah, he has. He's now referring it to as our bill, I guess.
Our bill, and he says there's a lull, and he's raising money off of it. So that's when you've changed your mind.
Right. It's a fantastic distraction for Tammy Baldwin, though. I'm surprised she didn't call up Scott Walker and say, "Yeah, could you maybe pass this right to work bill this week?" Because it's been a pretty bad couple of weeks for her. The whole story.
It's actually almost 2 months.
Yeah. I mean, the whole story where it's taken a turn where she's now lawyered up with regard to the Toma VA scandal, and now there's the whole the payout to her staffer and the silence agreement, the
confidentiality agreement,
the non-disclosure agreement, and then now there's this charge that her staffer was sexually harassed or discriminated against. For being straight, it's turning into this issue. It's really strange.
Why do you think she's not talking? I mean, the fact is, I've heard from top Republicans saying she's not only handled controversies well, but she's avoided controversies.
Well, it's because she doesn't do anything. I mean, she's kind of in the Herb Kohl mode of, you go to Washington as a senator, we wave goodbye to you, and you don't say anything, and you're the most popular politician in the state for years and years. And she was always like that when she was in Congress
and in the legislature.
I
mean, though she did talk to reporters in the legislature, it's just very strange that she's I asked him for a comment. She's given one interview. It lasted 1 minute, and she was walking out of a committee meeting. And when I asked if I could have 1 minute to talk to her, they sent me a transcript of the 1 minute interview. Seriously, that's what I got, and that's it so far. A statement from her attorney acknowledging that she fired somebody 30 days ago, but that's all we've seen.
Well, we have a reader question on it. I just want to ask that first, and then we'll get into some more things. So this reader question came in from Bob, and it's for Dan. It says, Dan, confidentiality agreements and severance payments are common when people leave jobs in the private or public sector. Do you really think it's fair to tar Senator Baldwin with the hush money connotation just because someone is holding out and preserving the option of suing for discrimination? What do you say?
Well, first of all, I decided not to use the term hush money. The Republicans have used it. Joe Fadness has used it, but that assumes intent, and I don't know why she was offering the severance payment. And then secondly, I don't think it's true that in the public sector that it's typical to have a confidentiality agreement. Have you heard of confidentiality agreements that were paid out to public employees? That strikes me as pretty unusual. And so I was interested in it because it involved tax dollars, or at least I thought it involved tax dollars. And no one will say, we've never seen the deal that they offered to Marquette Baylor, who was fired for her handling this situation and some other stuff. Marquette's not talked. Baldwin's people won't respond. They're not bound by Freedom of Information requests, so I submitted one anyway, and they didn't respond to that. So, first of all, I don't think that it's common, and So I had no problem writing about it. It's weird.
It is weird. You don't. I mean, if it wasn't weird, you wouldn't be writing about it. That's sort of
Right.
how it goes. But Christian, what is your take on that?
Yeah, I mean, in the private sector, I would think a non-disclosure agreement and maybe a payout of some kind is probably fairly routine. But in the public sector, where we kind of have this expectation where there's kind of a freedom to know
Right.
what your elected officials are up to, there's a whole different standard there. And if tax money was used in any way in this payout, then I think that's a big
the media has gone to court to try to get confidentiality agreements and severance payments made public because it is tax dollars. So I didn't see any difference between this and writing about a superintendent who got a severance deal.
All right. Well, let me ask Christian, because he may be, he's relatively new here at the Journal Sentinel and as a columnist, and folks may not be as familiar with him as they are with Dan. But why don't you tell us a little bit, Christian, about your background, the conservative perspective you bring, and how you came to that.
ACT scores, anything.
or show tunes. We'll go to that if we have to.
Right. Well, I'll go into depth. Let's see. Well, I worked in the legislature here in Wisconsin for about 8 years. And so some people have labeled me a political operative for my years there. I like to consider it knowing what's going on.
Who'd you work for?
I worked for Sheila Harsdorf, who's a state senator from the northwest part of the state. Worked for her for about 6 years, and then for some other people before her. Both my mom and dad are from Milwaukee. They both went to Pius High School. My dad's in the military, went to West Point, so we moved around quite a bit. I grew up kind of in the D.C. area when he was working at the Pentagon. And I am, I guess, what you would consider the conservative columnist. I probably wasn't when I was younger. For my first vote, I think I voted Clinton and Feingold. I was up here at the time.
Do you feel guilty about this?
No, I wear it as a badge of honor. I evolved, as Scott Walker would say. So then I worked in the legislature, got a job with the Wisconsin Policy Research Institute, wrote for them for a few years. Ended up writing a lot of stuff for National Review during the protests and everything.
Your introduction in Wisconsin politics was not as Christian Schneider, though. Your introduction was you were an anonymous blogger, and everyone tried to figure out who you were.
Indeed, it was kind of a parlor game up at the Capitol. I had a friend of mine in my office who said, "Well, you should start an anonymous blog and kind of tell people what really goes on here in the Capitol."
And you were working for Sheila Harsdorf at the time?
Yeah.
Okay.
And I said, "Well, who would ever read anything like that?" And then suddenly, after a few months, people started reading it, I guess. And then, one local newspaper actually had a reporter almost full time trying to figure out who I was.
That was the Cap Times, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. I was interested in your music choices mainly, though.
Yeah, I mean, it's nice to be able to talk about kind of whatever you wanted to talk about. But yeah, I mean, as a youngster, I didn't really consider myself all that conservative. Then I started reading, like a lot of George Will, things like that, and moved over to the right side.
Well, speaking of the right side, let's get to a question from one of our readers.
All right.
This is from Luke.
Sure.
As you might imagine, presidential politics is our thing these days with Scott Walker, and he's asking, how are Walker's GOP opponents going to attack Walker from the right? For example, Rand Paul can be attacked as weak on foreign policy. Jeb Bush can be attacked for support of Common Core and amnesty. What is Walker's weakness on the right, and what will his opponents in the primary use against them? Christian, why don't you give us your take?
I think that's a really good question, because I think in the last couple of weeks you've seen what happens when he starts getting attacked from the right. In a Fox News interview over the weekend, he was kind of wishy-washy on abortion.
Right.
And it's no coincidence that just yesterday or the day before you see him come out strongly in favor of the 20-week abortion bill, which he sat, was it right here or upstairs?
No, it was, when we asked him the question
Yeah,
on that.
asked him over and over and over again.
In October.
Yeah, and he dodged. Well, that's a question for the legislature. So it's right after he gets challenged on that on Fox News that he makes that statement, and then he does kind of his dance on immigration, where he said, at one point I'm for a pathway to citizenship, but then now.
Then he denied it, that he had ever said that. He said that was the reporter
But
who
there's
said the
video.
statement, and now he says his position's changed. So what do you think's going on with him right now? I mean, why do you think he's having these troubles where he says something, then he has to walker it back.
We coin new terms here all the time. This is the walker it back.
So what's going on there? I've been thinking about this a great deal, and I don't.
What do you think is going on here?
I think, one, the speed at which things get turned around a lot faster than what he's used to. I don't think it's that people don't ask him these questions. I asked him about the personhood amendment last week, and he gave a bizarre answer, which was that he doesn't have a position on it now, but if he runs for national office, he will. And I'm still trying to figure that out. I think when he was here, he tried to frame himself as a common sense conservative. I think he's now trying to reach out to a particular group within the Republican Party. He's trying to reach out to the social conservatives, the people who aren't in the establishment. And I don't know if it's really who he is. And so he's answering stuff in a way that he's not used to. I mean, that's just my guess, and I might be wrong, but I think he doesn't seem natural in the way he's answering some of these things.
Well, do you think, Christian, it's that the topics are different and he's not prepared for them in that regard, or he's just not thought through the political implications of how he answers, or in some cases doesn't answer a question where he's been kind of silent on some things and taken some heat for that?
Yeah, I mean, there is something to the fact that I don't think he expected to be in the position that he is right now and to have the glare on him that he has right now. I mean, the Washington Post is cranking out 3 Walker pieces a day on something that he said, parsing all this, and so I don't know if he was ready for the glare in that way. There's the old adage that a gaffe is when a politician accidentally tells the truth. I think he's having gaffes by not saying what he really thinks and kind of what we know that he really thinks, and by trying to conceal that, by appealing to this certain segment of the party, I think is kind of hurting him rather than just
Do you
being
think
able
that's
to
what he's doing? Trying to, he had a speech to the K Street crowd, the lobbyists and so forth, and I understand he laid out his path to victory at the speech, and it dealt with not reaching out to the establishment until after the primaries. I think he's trying to do that, but he also doesn't have a Greek chorus. Here, when there's an issue going on, Belling and Sykes can tell him this is what you're supposed to think on these things. And because the things are a little bit slower, I was trying to think of any instance in which he and Charlie Sykes did not agree on an issue, and I can't think of one. But on some of these other things, it's going to be more difficult because right now we don't know what kind of foreign policy he would have. Mm-hmm. I don't think he knows what sort of foreign policy. He knows he wants a tough foreign policy, but what's that mean? Does that mean he's going to be a neoconservative, or what sort of conservative does he hope to be?
Well, here's another question that fits right on that theme, I guess. This is from Fred, and he says, in your opinion, is Scott Walker ready for the prime time of a national candidacy or not? His ISIS slip-up seems like a harbinger of things to come. And this was probably a slip-up or two ago when we're talking about ISIS. So what's your take? Is he ready or not?
I think it was a metaphor for what's going on. In that audience, the people he's trying to reach, the social conservatives who were there, it went over really well. It was outside that with the media and others that it was a problem. And he's doing very well. He's polling very well with the social conservatives. And the super conservatives, the people on the far right, but it's in the media where he's having the problems. But I don't think that's going to really hurt him, and that's why some people have suggested maybe refusing to answer the Christian question on Obama was intentional. I don't think that was the case, but I think he didn't know how to answer that exactly, given who he's trying to target.
Yeah, I just think in that case he was being so careful, and it's frustrating because it makes it look like he's trying to pander to this group that may not think Obama's a Christian, when it's one of the most known things about him. I mean, read David Marinus's book. It's all over the news. Jeremiah Wright, the whole thing, that's a Christian church. So for him to try to duck that question, I think it just kind of makes it look like he's pandering to this section of the party that maybe a little.
But I asked a couple of my friends who are very, very conservative, and I said, what do you think about Obama's faith? And they were like, I have no idea what he believes. And I was like, what about Jeremiah Wright? And they said, I don't know. And I mean, it was not something. you might be pandering to the people who think he's a Muslim or something like that, but I think with you, me, and the three of us, we know that he is United Church of Christ and his conversion story and all of those things, but I don't think that's super well known among conservatives.
Yeah, he's taking non-gotcha questions and turning them into gotcha answers, like easy questions.
Right, and then you turned it into a 2-day story.
But I mean,
or 3 days.
His argument is, well, I'm not going to answer these gotcha questions. First of all, they're not really gotcha questions. I mean, they're pretty easy questions to answer. He could have just said, he identifies himself as a Christian. I take him at his word.
Is that post screw up spin or not? I asked him the abortion. I asked him the evolution question, 2010. He came in for an edit board. He's leaving. I said, hey, this is a question I've never asked you. He answered it really easily. He said, I believe in God, and I don't think that conflicts with science. I didn't write it up because I thought that's not really news. He gets asked almost verbatim the same question, and he turns that into a 2 or 3 day story.
Well, are there really, in this day and age, a lot of gotcha questions in the sense that don't politicians going in have this menu of, you're going to be asked, did you use drugs?
I'm a huge fan of gotcha questions. I love gotcha questions. As someone who asks them all the time, I think he's being introduced to a national audience. Why don't we find out where does he stand on some of these issues? I have no problem with them. They're asking it, and I am surprised that he seemed not to be prepped for those things.
Right, I guess that's why I wonder is more the preparation of it. If you know you're going to get that sort of question at some point, right? So why?
And it was National Darwin Day or something like that in England.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, Scott Walker's history is he's so well prepared and on message and thought these things through. So it's sort of
I still think the speed of things, the speed. If you say I don't know, here he knows all of the reports. He could call back 15 minutes later and say I've thought it through. Here it is. I don't think he can do that now.
So I'm part of the crowd that thinks that Scott Walker is probably going to get tougher questions than like Hillary Clinton will get. But if we live in this world, maybe some of these questions might be gotcha questions, but it would be nice for him to just be able to answer them rather than sit and complain about the media. I mean, you're never going to lose money in a Republican primary complaining about the media. So that might be why he's surging a little bit.
He threw me completely when I said that. I said, you've been someone who's been close to the media and a friend of the media, and there's the old joke that the easiest way to get injured in Madison was to step between Scott Walker and a TV camera. And when he comes in for an edit board, he knows every person there. He's one of the first people to call Dave Umhafer and congratulate him for winning a Pulitzer. He is someone who likes the media, and I told Huffington Post doing a story. I said, if he weren't in politics, he would be in the media. But then he said his career, no one would have ever accused him of being a friend of the media. And I was like, what? And that's what he said in Green Bay a week ago. So you think the press won't ask Hillary tough questions?
She'll get tough questions. She won't get like, do you believe in evolution?
What about the email story this week? Is it much to do about nothing? Are you surprised the New York Times did the story?
I'm not surprised. I think it's a pretty good story.
Yeah.
I mean, there are a lot of cheating husbands around America that would like to have the email system that she had.
The New York Times has been very tough on her over the years. They did the Whitewater stuff.
Yeah.
Well, it's interesting you guys talk about emails because we have a couple questions from our readers about that, and that was one of the big stories.
Via email?
Via email. So we're all meta here at JS Online. So this is from Sandra. If emails are going to be a presidential campaign issue for Hillary, how does Scott Walker fare on the issue, having had a separate political email network operating in his own courthouse office, allegedly without his knowledge? Are these two made for each other in a general election because that sort of nixes it out as an issue for both of them?
With Scott Walker, he doesn't get. There are yet to be very many stories about what Scott Walker said in those emails. I mean, what emerges from his emails, and I've read thousands and thousands of his emails. One thing that emerges is that he's not petty or catty about the press. Everyone on his staff is, and each of them have things to say about the media and other people and each other, and he didn't do that. And the two, how much he was in control of his county executive staff. He was involved in all of these decisions, particularly on how to respond to the media. In terms of the secret router and all that sort of stuff, sure, I think that's fair game in a presidential race. No one's ever shown, outside of those people who were hurt by that and actually ended up being charged. I mean, they're the only ones that anyone has found anything that they did anything wrong with it. No one's shown that Walker has, but I think it's fair game.
I've read a share of those emails, and I got to tell you, Dan, as your boss, I don't think you can put through for the therapy costs. You haven't read 10,000 plus emails about the inner workings of county government. But Christian, what do you think about the issue of these emails, and does this become a problem for Scott Walker? It certainly is for Hillary at the moment.
Well, I think the content of the emails is a different issue than the idea of setting up a different system. Do I think Scott Walker knew that his staff had set up like some separate router? I don't know. I don't think so. I think the charge against Hillary is that this was a deliberate attempt on her part to shield her communications that were, and these are, I mean, this is not Scott Walker at the county exec level. These are state secrets that she's emailing Vladimir Putin in the middle of the night. So I think that's what really rubs people the wrong way, is that you might have sensitive information that's going over this system that only she had control of.
I think this is where you and I would probably differ. On the secret router, you say you don't think he knew. I would say we don't know. He could, he couldn't.
Well, I said I don't know.
We don't have any proof. He may have. I would not be surprised if it turned out that he knew about it. I would not be surprised if he didn't know about it. But actually, in terms of the emails, it looks like when you go through these that he almost knew that these things would be put out eventually, whereas everyone around him had no idea and would be willing to say silly things about each other.
Well, that would be evidence that he didn't know, because anything you say over email, if you're a government employee like I was, you kind of just assume that the press is going to be able to get.
I don't think it's evidence one way or the other. I think he might have known, he might not have known.
Well,
I have no idea.
Just as a reporting piece of information you haven't read a lot, is how much of the emails were from Scott Walker to and from on that system or on a private account, and how many were campaign
I don't know
people going back and forth?
I don't know. I mean, there's a lot of activity between the campaign and the staff. I don't think we know how many of them were using the secret router, because it doesn't say this came from a secret router. If Fran McLaughlin, the spokeswoman, sending a message to the campaign, the email doesn't show which system was used, whether she was sending it from home or whether she was sending it from the office.
Well, there's a big difference between using a different email address and
Right.
then using a router in your office, because Hillary was using a secret email address, which means she knows that what she's sending is separate from the State Department, whereas Scott Walker's using his county email address. It gets wired through this. I mean, the tech guys can talk.
It's just bizarre that her predecessors, I mean, not her immediate predecessors, but some of her predecessors are doing the same thing. It's just weird that, I mean, dealing with politicians all the time, very few people send me stuff. I mean, occasionally someone will say, this is unrelated to my job, you should know this, and so I'm not using my regular email. But when I'm corresponding about government stuff, it's highly unusual for people to be using their own private email. I mean, it's amazing to me that Hillary Clinton was doing that. I mean, that was exclusively her method of communicating.
Yeah, well, there's a related question from Dean on that. He also asked about the Clinton-Walker dynamic, but he asked, will all Republican presidential candidates stay mum on the issue? This is in regard to Scott Walker. Or will some possibly use this to attack Walker, especially now that he's considered a front runner? So we're talking about Walker's system. I know the Democrats are, but do you think Jeb Bush, Rand Paul, different people, do they bring this up and say, look, Scott was in the same kind of turret with the same brush?
You've already seen Jeb Bush release all of his emails and make an issue with Hillary Clinton. Why wouldn't they? I mean, you saw the governor of Texas going after him for his statements about ISIS. I think, and I've heard talk that some of his opponents are trying to spread information suggesting Walker's more moderate than what he's painting himself to be. So some of the best opposition research is done by people in your own party. So yeah, I think they'll use this against him.
I don't see any reason why they wouldn't. I mean, this isn't one of those out of bounds types of issues. I mean, why not?
And just about every issue that's brought up in the general election will have been brought up during the primary, particularly when you have this many candidates.
Right, and especially if he stays the front runner, then all bets are off.
Do you think he stays the front runner?
I don't know. I mean, there are a lot of people that complain, well, he's peaking too early. Well, like 95% of candidates never peak at all. So, I mean, he should be...
It's just better to peak early than not at all.
Yeah, it's better to peak at some point. So at least, he has the nationwide recognition right now, but I don't know. I mean, I think, between he and Jeb, It's probably even money right now. At some point, Marco Rubio is going to make himself known in this race. I mean, he's just too good of a communicator.
Paul Ryan said the other day he expects 1 or 2 more candidates to get involved to enter the race who aren't even in the race now. I'm assuming he's talking about
Pence.
Yeah, right.
Or somebody
That's
like that.
I'm assuming, and he's obviously not peaked at all because he's not even in the race.
Right.
So there'll be the scrutiny of him when he gets in.
Once you start to separate some of the chaff, that's a farming term, isn't it? then I think there might be some room for somebody to jump in.
Throw in all farming terms that you want to.
Well, I mean, it's like the correct answer, we're here in March, is it's best to peak right in the first round of the NCAA tournament and carry it all the way through, right? I mean, I don't know where we're off on politics in March. Anyways, we have a few minutes left, so I want to get another question or two in here from readers. This is harkening back to the gotcha question. So this is from Thomas, who says, Governor Walker has complained about gotcha questions from the media, but is he or is he not Governor Gotcha in the way he campaigns on one set of issues, yet as soon as he's elected, he pushes numerous major initiatives, and he's citing here UW cuts, right to work, I'm sure you think of Act 10, that he didn't even talk about during the election. What do you say?
Yeah, he does that. There was a story that Patrick Marley wrote saying he likes to spring surprises. So, I mean, that's... okay.
This to me during Act 10 was one of the weakest arguments against Scott Walker. Well, he never talked about it during his election. I mean, politicians are kind of famous for not.
It's a bigger issue on right to work. Because the right to work, he was saying in September this is a distraction, and now he's saying it's not a distraction, that there's a lull in the session. He said in 2012 he would do everything in his power to stop right to work from getting on his desk, and now saying that was something that applied just to his first term. I think he realizes that he's changed his message on that.
Yeah, well, this is a follow-up in a way, or a related question from Mark from Tulsa, who talks about when politicians do that, is if it's a political calculation, doesn't that signal that the candidate believes he or she can't win if the electorate knows in advance what they will do once in office? I mean, is that a weak point, that if someone doesn't tell you, then they spring it on you? That have they told you ahead of time? Are they worried about, the blowback on an issue like that?
Go ahead.
I think maybe they think that the electorate might not be entirely with them, or they need more time to explain it, or whatever.
I think if Scott Walker had come out in favor of right to work during the last election, he probably still would have won. I don't think that was Mary Burke's path to victory.
And how many people were sitting there thinking that Walker was anti-right to work? I mean, all along he had pretty much said.
I don't think most people even know how right to work works. I mean, as Mark Belling pointed out, some reporters don't know how right to work works. So, I don't think if he had brought it up, he would have gotten the same percentage of vote that he would have otherwise. Act 10, that would have been different if he had said that I'm going to do this. You say it's a weak argument, but still, if that had been part of the discussion, yes, I'm going to take collective bargaining rights away from most public employees, that would have been an interesting discussion before the election.
Yeah, an interesting discussion that would have taken away from what he wanted to talk to. I mean, American politicians are famous for saying one thing and then doing another.
Right.
It happens every time. I mean, Jim Doyle's campaigned on, I'm not going to raise taxes, I'm going to cut 10,000 state employees. He got into office, he cut a few, and was like, calling it a day. So, I mean, it happens. And
yeah, it happens regularly. But I don't think that it means that he wouldn't have gotten elected, though.
All right, as we wind down here, I just want to talk and ask you guys, what will we be talking about next week? Again, right to work will be done, but what's the biggest legislative issue, biggest thing? It kind of harkens back to the first question, but a little different. What's the next thing the legislature tackles?
Well, this will be done, so they'll move back to the budget and many of the ideas that are in the budget. And as I said to start out with, it's clear that Voss and Fitzgerald aren't happy with Walker not being around as much as he is. And I think they want to have a public discussion about the debt levels, the gas tax, and all of those things. And that's just not happening right now.
What do you think, Christian, in terms of what percentage, when all is said and done, obviously there will be a budget passed and it'll look largely like what Walker has proposed, but what doesn't make it in? What is the legislature most upset about or most likely to change or scale back?
I think you're going to see some changes to to what Walker offered on the UW system. I think you probably see some money put back in. And I mean, working in the legislature as long as I did, they are not keen on giving the whole system, the autonomy, the authority. They always want to have their fingers in there to be able to micromanage the system. So I think you'll see some changes
the
in that.
shift goes back to the UW system and the impact of these cuts. We haven't heard very much about what, UWM says they'll have to cut $20 million. What does that look like? And then the discussion is that how much they want to cut? Do they want to make it less than that? And if so, where do they make the cuts if they don't do it there?
We didn't touch on it, but what about the arena plan? Does that go through as Walker has proposed with the so-called jock tax, or does that become
Well, I mean,
problematic?
Robin Voss said 220 is too much for the state to be putting up, and what I expect is the city will come through, create a TIF district to help out. I think the county will donate the Park East lands, but it looks like Voss wants the county and city to put up some money too. So that's where we're headed on the discussion. If the state puts in only 120 million, where's that extra 100 million come from?
Yeah, there's going to be an arena. These things always go down to the last minute. I remember sitting in the Senate when they were doing the Lambeau Field, and Bob Harlan was walking in and out of
Were you
Chuck
there for
Koala's office. Yes, it was 4 in the morning, and we were still there trying to hash this out. So it's not a Republican or Democrat
Were you there
thing.
for the Miller Park stuff?
No, that was just right before me.
I was
so.
there. That was cool. We
Oh,
were all
yeah?
trying to find Joe Winnicky. Where is Joe Winnicky? Seriously, we were. We were
Yeah.
checking bathrooms and couldn't find him. So.
Right. Well, these things always go down to the last minute. Everybody's got to make their mark. So it'll get done, but
It might not look like it is right now, but
Right.
yeah, you're right. It'll get done.
All right, I think that's a good spot to leave it. Thanks everybody for joining us today. We'll be back again next week, I believe, with the same format, maybe different guests. And I know Dan is planning to
And
stick
we'll find out
around,
if you're here again.
I may be here again, I don't know.
A surprise host.
A surprise repeat host. Anyways, Dan is going to stick around and answer some more of the questions that readers had submitted for the next little bit, and you can find those online as he's completing them. So again, thank you for joining us, and have a good day.